It is a Friday morning of Skoll week, so we're all a little bit hoarse, or many of us are. Some of us have regrets about decisions we made yesterday evening. To have that one meet that one last group of people for just a short chat that probably went a bit longer than it should. But we're also here looking forward to some music at the end of this session, and I'm wondering, oh man, I have to put up with these guys on a panel before I get into the music. And the thing is, we will have a fantastic performance at the end, but just as importantly, I am really privileged to be sharing the stage with three lights of hope in a moment of, I would say, potentially a little bit of gloom in the state of the planet and in the state of partnerships and collaboration and collective action for the planet. So, don't mean to start us on a downer because I do think that there's a lot to be excited about. And hopefully Dominique Bikaba, Farwiza Farhan, and Mindy Luba will help us understand what they're seeing, where it is challenged, where there will be hope, and what we can all do to drive for that planet we want to see. So I'll start with the obvious question, right? So what is, well, not the obvious question, because right now, anyone who read any newspapers this week, anyone who's been in any of the conversations of the last few weeks is aware of the fact that forget new partnerships for the planet, a lot of underlying basis for partnership and collaboration around the world has had the proverbial chainsaw taken to it. So we could spend some time on that and catastrophizing, but I actually want to start with what's the good news? What is working? Because in each of your work, there's evidence that real partnerships can have impact. And given the state of the world today, I think, Mindy, we will actually start with you and the focus of your work. Where is it that you have seen partnerships change behavior, create an opportunity and space for the planet?
Great. And yes, I'm going to leave behind some of the catastrophizing and the world-changing actions taken in my country, in the United States right now. I run an organization called Ceres, and we work with the largest business and investors to integrate sustainability. And I want to talk specifically about that, what it means to climate, what it means to nature, and so on. I'm not a business person, I'm an environmental lawyer. I've spent 40 years as a regulator and advocate. But we can't solve the problems that we exist, live, work to solve without the leverage, the power, the resources of businesses. It's not possible. The problems are too big. We need too much money. They've got the capital. So the frame that I look at every day, and it's not because I want businesses to make more money, less money, let's leave my politics or anything else about it. We've got to define, and I'll talk about how we have quickly, and I don't want to dump, the issues we're working on. And they're not issues, they're values, they're life-changing sustenance. They are who we are and what makes our families safe and thrive and so on. We've got to be able to define them in business terms, in financial terms, in investor terms. I mean, sometimes I go too far. I did a presentation before the board of General Electric a number of years ago, and Jeff Immelt at that time said, I'm a grandfather, I care about my grandkids as well. And that's great. But the language that we have to speak, and it is a different language, it's not the difference between one country and another, is why these issues are a financial imperative. And businesses can't exist without nature, without enough water, with the climatic changes going forward. We just saw Los Angeles, the fires, hundreds of billions of dollars of loss. There is no business that could operate without a supply chain that's safe and secure and get what they need from nature. And so we started, I'm going to give an example, and then I want to hear from my colleagues, a number of years ago with something called Climate Action 100+, an initiative brought 700 investors together to focus on the 100 largest emitters of greenhouse gas emissions, to look at the financial impacts of climate on their investments, on their businesses, on the companies in their portfolios. And those investors are meeting with, pressuring, working with the companies to change how they do things. And we're seeing good results. Not magical, it's a battle, it's a fight every day. But it's one more voice, one more tactic and strategy that allows us to try and move closer to where we want to go. More recently, we launched Nature Action 100+, where really now we don't have You know, with climate action, we have 590 investors and $60 trillion of investments under management. With nature action, it's much newer. I think we've got 230 investors, $900 billion. But these investors now every day want to learn about the financial impacts of the community. We have insisted, as part of the demands we ask them to follow, that they develop nature action plans with the community. They can't just, from on high in the United States and London, say this is what's good for. They've got to involve the community in setting goals and what they're going to do with their firms. It's new, but we have got to bring that same power and leverage, as but one example, and we could talk about others later, to the debate, where this is much an economic issue, as of course it is, a human values, an issue of our lives, our family, and we've got to, from my little perch, keep defining it as such, get better at defining why this is ravaging not only communities, but people's supply chain, and thus that company won't be able to do what they thought they could do. So, like it or not, and sometimes it's too much economics, we've got to define it for what it is, which is a business imperative, or in my world, a material risk. Companies love talking about risk, and investors.
Yeah.
To my colleague, thank you.
Something I wanted to pick up on that, Mindy, because there's a couple of things that I take away from that. One is the power of persistent effort in a journey, right? You and Ceres have been at this journey of expressing these imperatives in business terms for decades now. And actually, while some of the things we're seeing are disappointing, there's something of a compliment that your opponents are paying you by saying the only way we can see to stop this dynamic is by taking flagrantly anti-market action, like banning certain things from being considered and so on. It tells you that once you get investors to think this way, it has a real force and it is having an impact. So I think there's something exciting even in the backlash. Dominique, you work in the Congo, and you're pulling together in service of nature the work of communities, government, and researchers in new and innovative ways. Would love to hear your reflections on this question of what is working in that regard.
Thank you, James. Dominique and James said I'm from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And when you Google DRC, what gets out is war and killing, all these atrocities. Inside that, there are things going on and working for our planet. The DRC is the second largest country in Africa. You've heard about the Congo Basin region, and the DRC alone counts around 80% of the Congo Basin forest. So we have a big responsibility, because if these forests are well protected, it's not just for DRC, it's not just for Africa, but it's a global benefit. In addition to this rich biodiversity, the country is also very rich in minerals, which actually attracts a lot of companies, but also greedy people, and which I suppose, and I think, actually provokes this unrest political situation in the country. But it's possible to talk to the governments, companies, and communities, and as actors to do business in the right way. Actually, Strong Roots have been working for biodiversity conservation, human rights, and sustainable development. And our project is securing 1 million hectares of forests connecting to protect areas. We've already secured 600,000 hectares, and we are working on securing additional 400,000 hectares to make up this 1 million corridor connecting to existing protect areas. How did we get there? Because even in the government, central government in Kinshasa, when they look at what is working in this region, they say, how did you make this happen in a region which is very competitive for land? And we say, it was just a matter of collaboration. We brought on the table the government, the communities, and make them understand how this was important. But given the political language. We actually had to lobby for a law from 2010 to 2014, which could give the communities the right of governance and management of their traditional lands, which passed actually in 2014. And this is the basis legal for this program. I would say that there are things which might work if people are transparent and have a common goal, a common mission. The only challenge I see is about engaging private sector, not because they don't have a good will, but because of the disconnection between the language between the financial settings and the community settings. This 1 million hectares of forest land, if you ask the people here, researchers, how much is this forest? They'll go down there and count the number of gorillas, the number of elephants, and see underneath, which is a wealth of gold and diamond, and say, it's $10 billion US. But if you ask the same question to a community member, they'll tell you, oh, that's where I buried our ancestors. That's where we do our rituals, our, habituation and all the, and that makes a disconnection in the languages. How do we get this financial, sophisticated language to be translated in the community language so that the two settings can work together? I think that will make a big difference also at the financial economic level, because at this time, we've secured rights to land for these indigenous people and local communities. We are ensuring we have data, enough large data set of the ecological balance this forest is doing and will do in the next years to come. But we still need to work at that point on how to harmonize the languages between money and traditional cultural values of the people based on land.
Yeah. I think that's powerful. And I do wonder also, Dominic, whether there are just some things that you can't translate into money. And so I think we know the power. And I think, in Mindy's case, we heard the power of actually speaking a language that money understands. And you're doing an amazing job of bridging between community, government, other stakeholders. But if someone said we found a massive oil deposit under the Vatican, I doubt that folks would be like, well, the oil rigs are going in tomorrow. And so I don't think it's about trying to come up with a financial way of talking about our ancestors. It's about saying those spiritual connections are just as valid as anyone else's. And having but having said that, there is also no substitute for figuring out how to bring all of these stakeholders together.
Exactly.
Wiza, in your work in Indonesia, in Aceh, you're building a different, interesting sets of bridges between not different kinds of actors, but actors in civil society, finding ways to work together. Talk a little bit about that journey of building powerful alliances.
First of all, when that question, what's working? It really comes down to the humility that nothing that we have ever achieved, we achieve by ourselves. We were never alone in this journey. And in the context of the Loise ecosystem where I work in Sumatra, it's a landscape that is so vast, 2.7 million hectares of relatively intact ecosystems. But within this 2.7 million hectares, sure, there's tiger, elephant, rhino, and orangutan, but there's also people. There's 500,000 community members sharing this landscape. Some of them transmigrant, some of them indigenous, but each of these individuals belong to this landscape. So when we think of protection of landscape as vast as Loise, there is many components that goes into it. Sure, you look at legal protection, you look at how the communities could feel empowered and belonging that this landscape is theirs, because for so long, history of conservation in Indonesia and many parts of the world has been the history of dispossession. when we look at landscapes and we think that people has to be out of this area, and to bring back that sense of belonging and honoring that respect. And essentially, when we think of this partnership, us as one of the civil society members in this context, we don't necessarily have expertise around species. We have no idea in our organizations where the elephant distributions are, but the local community does, and the scientific ecosystems does. We don't necessarily have any idea how every tree are responding to the changing climate. But what we do have an idea about in our closeness with the communities is how they want to take bigger ownership on managing this landscape. So Loiser ecosystem work with many actors. Of course, there's private sectors, there's government, but there's also hundreds of civil societies operating in this area. Particular campaigns that we have pushed were done with many civil society members. The thing is, if I'm being completely honest, sometimes people coming into civil societies are people that have big egos. And we feel that we are right. We feel that our methods are the best. And we feel that we are there to educate and to help. But oftentimes, that's not necessarily our purpose. Maybe our purpose is to build that bridge between the community and the government and what they needed to happen for them to have a bigger role and meaningful role in changing policy, to have their space acknowledged, building that connections between the actors campaigning against palm oil and the palm oil company that need to transform. And sometimes that willingness to transform need to come with a little bit of force, with a little bit of conviction, but that bridge need to happen. Otherwise, it's just gonna be constant conflict without an end. And same goes sometimes between civil society and government. There are a constant distrust. Because civil society are always protesting, and then government like, yeah, you guys are just here to make trouble. But if we looked at the common goals, both are trying to serve in their roles, trying to serve their communities, trying to serve their constituents, and finding that common goals, common space where you can align your purpose and practically accept that the others might have intention that is also good, even if it's not aligned with yours. It was in the meditation this morning that the brother mentioned love and compassion to others. And even though we work in this space and we want to make change, sometimes we forget to share that love and compassion to those that don't agree with us.
Thank you for that, Wiza. I sensed a little bit, and I made a face about it. You pointed out a perhaps uncomfortable thing for those of us who gather every year here at Skoll, which is it's often true that some of the most egotistical, like I am my way or the highway folks out there are also people who really have committed themselves to building civil society mobilization in particular ways. And I think that there's a powerful point in there that says if we are trying to build these partnerships, we do need to be prepared to speak to people where they are. And I think we heard that in I think the opening plenary, that some of the comments in that conversation about, particularly in this moment, we're maybe harvesting a little bit of the price of being right than making progress. And it's interesting to see that being navigated. Mindy, I'll come back to you with a question just from what I'm hearing here, and it was in something that Wiza said and something that Dominic said. You've done a good job of translating into the language of particularly corporate America the imperatives of the planet. And yet it seems like that dialogue, to the extent that it has succeeded with capital allocators in the global north, sometimes isn't washing through to the behavior of corporate interests in the global south. How do we begin to actually, is the next phase of this actually bringing business, the operating side of business, to this same conversation? And how might you think about doing that?
Right. Well, the first thing I would say, I'm going to come back and answer, but in response to my colleagues whose comments, be it humility or collaboration, were so profoundly important. I think we ought to challenge ourselves. I mean, we do all speak different languages, and I don't mean Indonesia and the United States. We speak different languages in our advocacy efforts, in why we want change, and why we need to preserve nature, and why we need to bring greenhouse gas emissions down, and what we need to do. You know, we almost need, and there are all sorts of collaborations, but I would love to walk out of here where we pledge to not only meet and think about how to bridge those language barriers, but how to bring in some of the biggest players. You know, as much as all the companies in the US are being threatened by the new administration, don't care about diversity, they shouldn't care about climate, many of them still do. I mean, they'll probably move slower, but they still do. I think we can find somebody from Citigroup or from IKEA or from large companies to sit with us without their egos. There are people in some of these rooms who understand why we need to address human and nature's values within our economic system, because they really are one and the same, and you can't have an economic system if in fact you don't have insurance, and insurance companies are pulling out of all parts of the United States. People aren't going to be able to get mortgages if they don't have insurance. Every part of our economic system cracks if we don't address these issues. And we have enough technological challenges, which I don't know how to begin to address. But I do believe that together we could start addressing the literal discussion of words, but words and numbers and what they mean and why they mean things, and put value on humanity. This is not just about the number of trees and the amount of water. And yes, we say to companies all the time, you can't run a manufacturing facility without water. Does it not make sense to act and address water? You can't run your business without the natural resources you get from the developing world, from all over the global south. And we can make those arguments, but we could build them out if we have the right people in the room. I'm not naive enough to think, I mean, I've been at this for 40 years. I'm not naive enough to think, oh, we'll just tell each other the right words and all of a sudden they'll be there. But we can't move forward without the right word. I mean, we need to be able to bang into the head of every investor why the companies in their portfolios are at risk by ignoring nature, and by ignoring greenhouse gas emissions, and by ignoring humanity. And that all of those things will stop those companies from being able to thrive. So like everything, it's one step at a time. I wish I had a magic bullet, and I don't like bullets, period, but I wish I had a magic solution. But together, we could do better. I mean, we sit every day with hundreds of investors trying to make the case that acting on nature, analyzing nature risk in their portfolios is something they must do. We need to enhance those dialogues by real people on the ground, and we ought to walk out of here committed to doing a little more of that as much as we've all done.
Dominique, does that resonate with you in terms of the opportunity space? Are you seeing that space for a new kind of collaboration?
Actually, I love that, and I concur with Andy, because even before I comment on that, and another key stakeholder I see in this process would be researchers, science.
Yeah.
You know, we've built this program on a big, large asset from traditional knowledge and practices. But we found out what we learned from this process was that indigenous knowledge and practices alone are not enough. As science alone was not enough as well. So the idea is actually to see also how we can combine both traditional knowledge and science working together to ensure that we can not only understand the social settings and everything existing, ecological things, but also trying to understand what worked better from the communities, from the customary regulations. And we've started this working with, documenting traditional knowledge of all the local communities and Batu indigenous people to see how they played this and what supported the forests which exist today that we are protecting. So that's another comment I want to put there before I come back to Mandy's comment. And the reason why I love it is because if we really sit together and say we are all humans, and we understand that in addition to the financial and economic needs we have, we also need a good, healthy environment to live in. If we have those aspects as basis for our discussion, we can go together. And I challenged my community in DRC before I came here, and seeing all this war going on for 30 years in DRC now, all around mining and mineral and so on. We've been fighting that we don't like mining in these regions, in this hotspot, in community. And I said, I throw a question on the table when we're in Kinshasa in a big meeting and say, I think we'll never get out mining out of the picture. Because mining, if well done, could contribute to local economies, but also can continue supporting to sustain our global societies. What can we do to ensure that mining supports conservation in DRC? And people said, Dominic, we don't know if it's you because you are the one who have been refusing this. And I said, yes, I understand that societies are dynamic and things are changing. Maybe let's talk to the companies. Let's talk to private sector and government. We've been successful to get the government and local communities to secure this huge land in a very densely populated landscapes. Maybe we can find a way as well with mining and ensure that local communities improve their local economies, ensuring that we have infrastructure for them to live on, to depend on for their subsistence, and continuing to support our global societies. And I think these discussions gonna go on. I'm not sure that we have an answer in 1 month, in 6 months, but it's something which is on table now and trying to discuss because these lands are secured for perpetuity. Yeah. It's not for 10 years, it's not for 5 years, it's forever. What do we do with the minerals and other resources which is there? Yeah. How could communities and indigenous people benefit from that? Although we have these challenges of languages I mentioned previously. But there is a way. Yeah. And that requires to have a common understanding, a common vision, and assuring that we all make an agreement on the strategies and how we're gonna go through this. I think that's a comment I can make.
There's something really powerful there because in a way you're saying, look, the community is not in a static place. They want to improve their lives in particular ways. They want economic livelihoods and well-being on one hand. And we as a planet have a lot of work to do to transform our energy systems and other things. And if we all say that the work of stewarding the planet is the work of stopping all new things from happening, then we're saying keep the status quo. Instead, how do we have a dialogue about the right way to progress in a way that respects nature, respects communities, and also embraces, the future that these critical minerals might enable for all of us. It's not going to be an easy balance to strike, huh?
I know.
Does that kind of trade, and I don't even want to call it a trade-off. I want to call it taking more considerations together and trying to find a new level at which we can find a new balance. Does that resonate with some of what you're seeing in Indonesia, Wizi?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think what you point out, Dominic, when people come together and looked at the collective vision for an area, the collective vision for the landscape, something that is, far ahead, not just a day-to-day immediate needs. And really, the case with Indonesia, similar to so many other parts of the world, the inequality is huge. the poorer community member on the ground remains so far from accessing resources, but at the same time so vulnerable to the impact of environmental destructions and the impact of changing climate. So when we think at, places like Indonesia, this vast country with many islands, and then we look at a bit smaller scope of the Loiser ecosystem, where hundreds and thousands of people depend on a healthy landscape and healthy ecosystems, that dialogue need to happen, like it or not. And that dialogue really have to come from a place of mutual respect. Taking an example, I'm gonna say name of places that probably people have zero familiarity with. So for example, some of the work that we do with the local community in Benar Meriah, in one corner of the Loiser ecosystem, this is where the grassroots community understand the importance of protecting the forest. They understand that when the forests disappear, floods and landslides happen almost immediately. And then we move to the community of Pining, where there's a huge opportunity for gold mines in the area. But then the grassroots indigenous movements in this landscape are particularly strong that they themselves choose to block any large-scale mining concession. And it is up to the community to decide how they want the landscape to shape in the future. Oftentimes, what happens is a lot of these decisions happen at the central government level. Some company could come in and they convince the government that it's a good idea. They get concessions of hundreds of thousands of hectares, and community completely taken out of the decision-making process. And once that happened, we ended up firefighting. We ended up campaigning. We ended up demonstrating. We ended up trying to block this concession. But then the social fabric of the community would already change by the time a large company moves in. And we don't necessarily able to bring it back to what it was, but then recasting the vision of what possible future could still be from the current situation. And hearing what Mindy and Dominique been mentioning in our work as civil society members to build that respectful relationship with the communities, that also come with a whole lot of reflection and learning on our side. Have we really listened enough? Have we truly built that bridge of understanding, or do we come with such a strong agenda that we are unable to hear the feedback that they're giving back to us?
So much of this is about listening and understanding where people are coming from, and having clarity on what matters at the end of the day. The conversation is about partnerships for the planet, and I wanted to ask each of you, from your experience, maybe reflect a bit, and we will open up to questions from, I won't call them the audience, our fellow conversation members will be joining the conversation in a moment. But before we do that, I was curious, what levers would you like to see pulled? Or what's the next, in this new phase of building partnerships or preserving the partnerships we've built to date, or rethinking what will be needed after this period of threat? What would you like to see happen? What kind of tools, what kind of enablers, what kinds of things would you wish to see enable it?
So let me try and answer that, as well as comment on something you said indirectly. One thing we need to do is get enough warning as to what might be coming at us in the communities. And let's take AI. We've all sat in unending workshop sessions on AI, what it means, what it looks like, what it does to communities, how much energy it uses, how much water it uses, how we know it's coming, and we're probably not going to stop it, despite the forces in this room. We know it could have a troubling impact on nature and on our resources and on what allows us to build a community and business. Or we might be able to shift that a little bit and have much more, less impact, if not, God forbid, good impact, wouldn't that be nice, on things. And we ought to sit down in a partnership and think about how this should grow and how it moves forward without being detrimental. I mean, I could give you 1,000 statistics on how much water is used in AI and how much that is going to deplete the water from the water tables in communities that need that water most. We're seeing it, we've done mapping, we know how bad it is. Same thing with energy, extraordinary energy use. But there are ways to turn some of that around, not all of it. And how do we take some of those biggest tsunamis coming at us, like AI, and make them work for a community? And again, that's not going to be easy. There's not an easy answer. But there are ways definitely to mitigate the harm, if not to turn some of that around. You know, how do we walk out of here as a community and say, we're going to do an early on set of consultations around the globe on AI and what it means to the communities that it's going into. And I think that's a partnership that we could get all kinds of business and investors and community groups and probably governments into a discussion. And we don't it will move faster than we could think unless we step up now and say, how do we stop this from literally depleting water resources in communities that are already without enough water to feed their families and their children? So I think I go back, and I don't want to beat a dead horse to death. I mean, I go back to my assumption that it's actually in everybody's interest to stop climate change, to stop the water shortage. It's in all of our interests, including those businesses and investors. We have to define it in their term and define it in our terms for humanity, but find the place where we could come together and really take on some of the challenges. And look, in the United States even, and the world is much more complex, I feel like we're playing whack-a-mole. You know, there's a new crisis every day. How do we stop that one? They're trying to end environmental regulations, public health regulations, aid to the global south. I mean, we've got to pick a few things where we could really show that together it's in everybody's interest. And again, there'll always be special interests. They're going to make a lot of money by mining someplace or by rolling out AI quicker than possible. We know that, but we've got to build a strong enough force to try and counterbalance that.
Yeah, 3 small things, and the first one is about funding and donors. We always say we need capacity building for local people, for local organizations, but I think there might be a design of capacity building for donors as well. To understand that, to understand that money itself is not the project. Money should be understood as a tool to make a project happening. People might fail a wonderful project with big money because only the strategy or they think that because we have money, we have everything. That's one comment. Another comment would be, about the, coming back to what you said about putting people together, and I agree. When we are talking about the mining thing, for sure, we have to ensure that sacred sites for local communities and the indigenous people, protect areas with these high spot areas are no-go zone, whatever happens. Because then we are damaging, the future of these resources. DRC, when I look at it, when it comes to grand mammals, birds and plants, amphibians and reptiles, DRC counts the highest rate of endemism, which means that if these forests are gone, those species will be gone forever because they don't live anywhere else. Yeah. And last comment is about peace. We will never succeed the climate issues if we cannot work together to build peace. Yeah. And when I'm talking about peace, it's peace for people, not peace for companies, for governments, just peace for local people in their villages. They don't know politics, they don't know anything, but seeing the rate of their murdering, their massacre, it's just unhuman. We don't need that. To do business, to collect some tons of gold, killing 1 million of people, innocent people, we cannot be blessed in that way. So let's work with governments and companies, especially who have money to support buying those guns and everything, to tell them that if you want to fight, maybe go in the air and fight there, but not within communities. So we need peace, a sustainable peace, to ensure that we can combat climate change. If there is no peace in countries like DRC, I told you 80% of the Congo Basin forests are located just in one country. If they are gone, I don't know how it will come back. No, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
I feel that you really highlight such an important point. And I want to go back to that notion of building trust. Because trust is probably one of the most difficult things to build, but very quickly disappear, very quickly dissipate. I had this reminder. So if you can imagine landscape like the Loiser ecosystem, somewhere that's mostly completely unconnected, very, very remote. And there's the village that I went, and this village called Lesten. And it's located only 28 kilometers from the nearest village. But back then, before road, you need to walk a day and night to get to this village. The inhabitants is 70 individual. There is one primary school in this village. And people live there, they farm, they hunt, they fish. And on my first visit to that village, my colleague asked me, what would you do for a living if you're born here?
Yeah.
And sometimes, us in advocating for our mission, we are so stubborn in thinking that everyone gets it, everyone understands it. And because at that moment in time, I was arrogant and not very collaborative, I was adamant that if I lived in that village, I would still be a conservationist and maybe I would be designing a payment for ecosystem services kind of bullshit. Because, part of me completely failed to acknowledge the privilege that I have had that take me to the point that I am. And I think opening our eyes to the reality of others, the reality of the grassroots communities, the realities of companies that is working in the area, also the reality of species, elephants and orangutan, that did not ask, am I still in a national park or have I left the national park? Am I still in the right place to be? Is this banana plantation is something I can consume or not? The animals did not ask that. And if we think about building partnership, this partnership goes beyond organizations, goes beyond title. It comes down to us as humans with one another. Because at the end of the day, the head of the companies also have families. They also have hearts, although they might not use it so much when they're in a board meeting. And same goes with the community member. They have similar interests to come down to the same level or to go up in the same level and connect and rebuild trust in that way. And I think this is something that we lost at this current moment as we think of the state of the world and we looked at each other in all these different countries and leveraging trust again, allowing each other to connect at that human being level, I think it's a lever that we all need to work on.
Yeah, amazing. I'll say there's some profound things that I'm already taking away from this conversation. And Dominique, I think it starts with the point that, and I think I've certainly grown up and have had the privilege of spending most of my years, and they are, I increasingly realize, not few, taking for granted this idea that everything rests on peace. And we're seeing it now. You see it in the way that the villages are being affected, but we're seeing how if we trace back some of the backsliding around the commitment, the strong agreement, alignment of the Paris Agreement and all the things, so much of that can be traced back to conflict and the return of big conflict. So there's something about peace at the core. There's also something about seeing everyone around the table for a fully realized human being. No angels, no demons, everyone brings everything to the table and valuing each of their values equally. So we wouldn't drill in the Vatican, let's treat the indigenous shrines just as preciously. And then perhaps the last thing is powerful partnerships come from getting things done. Fragile partnerships come from stopping things. Right? And I think we need to build more partnerships for the world we want to realize in its full complexity and its full trade-offs, and maybe recognize that some of the more short-term partnerships to just stop this one thing, when you stack them all up, lead to a world of less collaboration. So how do we challenge ourselves to build a bigger picture? That's something I'm drawing from what I'm hearing here. But I also want to broaden the conversation to the other folks in the room. So let's take a few questions/comments. Let's keep them brief so that we are kind of shooting back and forth. And we will go, three ladies quick on the trick. Actually, we'll go 1, 2, 3, and Terry, and 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we may pause somewhere in between to reopen it, but yeah.
Thanks. Natalie from Heading for Change. 2 quick questions. The first, I think we can't talk about partnerships without talking about power. And so I'd love to hear from you your perspective on kind of how we would need to reshape and rethink power dynamics to kind of achieve the partnerships that we want. And the second, we've been talking about language in the sense of like the oral written form, but I think there's a language beyond that, before word. And so I'm curious to what extent, like, we actually need to be speaking another language, like the language of the heart, to really create that trust, the connection, and to really be able to value each other. Because otherwise, I just don't see how there's going to be a planet if we're not speaking a completely different language.
We'll do the first 3, pause, and then do the second 3.
Hi, my name is Emily from Awana Digital. Thank you so much. Also speaking about language, I was thinking about how much I've learned coming from a more Western perspective growing up, how much I've learned from different indigenous groups around, languages where there isn't even a word for nature because we're one with nature, and really how much has been lost and how many of the problems that we have today come from that European disassociation from nature that then translated into settler colonialism and everything else. And so I guess in a provocative way, I'm curious, we talked a lot about how to help those who frankly have a lot of money and resources better and are causing many problems, how to have them better understand nature. But is there even a deeper level at which like that language, that understanding should be met? And curious about what you think of that.
And one more, I think it was here. And then we'll do the next 3 and we'll add more.
Hi, I'm Laurie Gehring. I'm a climate change journalist. We have this moment, for all of the work trying to talk to each other in a better way and really make people understand what needs to happen. We're in this moment of contraction where the money is just not there, not least because of what's happening in the stock markets today, but all the changes in the US, the pressures that they're putting on other people, the sudden need for defense spending. Where do you think we go from here to try to meet these climate and nature goals in this moment?
So, power, the language of the heart, dissociation from nature. Where do we go from here? Discuss.
I think we start by building power. To accept that the power differential is very real. And how do we build power? If you think about large companies, they care about their customers, and nobody right now is organizing customers to show up at business X and say, you know, you're ravaging our forests, you're using 10 times more. I mean, in the United States, unless people rise up and push back, you know, we'll have a country we truly have never imagined as possible. You know, tomorrow there are rallies across the country, and that's probably a start. But look, we should always know that power is a bottom line, greed is a bottom line. And my guess is it will take centuries, or certainly decades, to change that. In the meantime, where I start is how to adjust that, how to change that, how to move it. I don't know how to get people to act from the heart. I mean, as I said, I spend much more time trying to convince people to act on climate change because it's going to cost them billions of dollars rather than their kids' lives. And I have kids. I think about when I'm leaving for them and I can't sleep at night. That should be enough, but what can I say? It hasn't proven to be enough. We ought to keep trying, not give up on that, but at the same time, we have to keep building power at a grassroots to put the right people in government and out, to put the right people on the boards of directors of corporations and out, and we've been able to accomplish that in different places. So it's one set of tactics and strategies. I would, in a million years, not sit here and say that's the answer. It is not the answer, but it is part of a set coupled together where we move things. I think we move companies because it's in their own self-interest, not because they care about the Vatican, or they may care about that, or a community, but because they can't run their business without the natural resources that exist in a community. They cannot run their businesses when they find out their cotton crop just died, either because there's too much water or not enough water. I was at the Gap when they found out part of their cotton crop died 4 years ago because of a drought. I mean, climate change is recreating our world in a way that impacts all of us, from the humanity, from what my kids and your kids are going to face. But businesses can't operate with that kind of up and down and uncertainty. And it's one piece of the puzzle. In the end, it is about building power. The reason many companies have changed is because they're investors, they're owners, the people who really buy their stock, the people we work with, to sit down in a room with us. Now, I would love your community of 70 to have somebody in that room. But in the meantime, and I don't dismiss that it's not possible in some world, but in the meantime, getting the largest owners of the companies doing the most harm to sit there and say it is not in their business interest, let alone human interest. So not an answer, but we need to, for government change, for change on all fronts, we need to keep building power.
Wiza, your thoughts on the same set of questions?
Yeah, I mean, very similar to what Mindy have mentioned. There's a lot of dynamic when we think about that unequal distributions of power. The worst impact of changing climate are felt by community on the grassroots that are emitting the least emissions, that are struggling to access resources, and sometimes the fact that we happen to be here in this forum, all of us doing important work in changing that equation, in changing that power dynamics, but we also must acknowledge that it is not done. And as Mindy said, you know, maybe we hope for the community to be in that space, but in reality, they often don't. Even in the spaces where they are invited to be, they have the right to be, they are allowed to be, sometimes they don't necessarily expanding and utilizing those space. If we're thinking where we go from here, we realize there is so much more work that needs to be done today than it has ever been, probably in the past 100 years. We have made so much progress from the last World War II to today, and suddenly we are regressing so much more. So countries like Indonesia, like Congo, like Brazil, like so many places need to own up to our own sovereignty when it comes to biodiversity and climate. Because yes, the world needed our biodiversity and our forests, but we need it too. And we needed to move away from that perspective that protection of environment is something that you do after your economic growth. It's something that needs to happen together at the same time. And therefore, the way we approach our economy needs to change. And I see a lot of change makers already working in this space, already doing this. We just need to be stronger together. And this is where the partnership have to get better. At the same time, to acknowledge that we are at this point in time where countries becoming more and more nationalistic, where a lot more fascist leaders get elected into power, perhaps they also come from a place of pain for people who elected them, for people who somehow see that these leaders would rescue them. And somehow, perhaps in our movement, we have failed to see those on the other side. We have failed to build that dialogue. And somehow we look down on those that we think are not as good as us. So it really, where do we go from here? This is an opportunity for all of us to reclaim back that space.
Yeah, maybe very short, actually, about power and language. And I'm, elaborating this around good governance. And especially in countries in Africa where we all know that the governance system is very weak, and that involves what I call the crime of development, which is corruption. But when we talk about corruption, I'm not saying these 500 francs that a taximan handled to a policeman on the road. I'm talking about this million of US dollars that companies are actually giving to our officials, our officers, so that they can make their business unseen, so that they can, set out the accountability to the people and to everybody. And so, but when we talk about corruption in media especially, and other actors, they say, oh, poor countries, officers are corrupted. But they don't say who corrupts them. And,
the immaculate bribe.
Yeah. Actually, if you can allow me to talk like an African, because I consider corruption like pregnancy. You cannot blame just a girl in a village, just a girl without looking at the boy who did that. And that's not unfair. That's unfair, actually. We have to ensure that we build institutions which really drive good governance, where everybody feel accountable to their actions and to their mission, their role and responsibility. Let me come quickly to the disconnected nature. Jane Goodall, you've heard about her probably. She said that nature is resilient. I agree totally. However, I concur with Riza. If we don't do anything now, even that assumption may fail. This is a time to act. And actions gonna require to look not at just small pieces of forest, small pieces of areas. Let's look at large landscapes. So that's only one way we can ensure to restore wildlife and those landscapes, but also we can ensure to look at the system governance in those areas, in those landscapes. Otherwise, it's gonna be very late. I think we've gathered many times together in COPs, in CBDs, in climate, everywhere. We are saying the same thing. We need actions now. This is time to act. Tomorrow can be late.
Yeah. Amazing. We're coming to the next questions. I did want to reflect also on that question of power and where do we go from here, and the sense of, okay, some of the resources coming under strain. There's an argument that part of what we are seeing is a reaction to and an acceleration of a trend of growing distribution of agency and power around the world. right? Those people over there are suddenly getting rich and not necessarily doing things the way we want them to do them, so how do we stop that? Or the consequences of actions that have destabilized certain places have made those places hard to live in, and people are exercising agency and going to where they believe they can raise their families, which just happens to be where we live. So I'm using a general we. Some of them are coming to Kenya, but we are not trying to build walls in Kenya. Please don't quote me. I have to travel to various places. And I have a very vulnerable passport. But I will say another thing that in this moment, and I did use the term catastrophizing, and I don't mean it in a patronizing way. It is true that some pillars of the movement to protect the planet are getting weaker in this moment because of backlash. It is also true that across what was typically called the global south or the tropics, or really where the majority of humanity lives, right? There is a growing sense of agency around both climate and our role as stewards of nature and of the planet. And there is a good news story that probably is as big, if not bigger, than the bad news story that's right in front of us. And we need to see it and figure out how we align to it, even though it might mean for some people moving from a role on center stage to a role in the supporting cast, which is part of what's driving the reactions we're seeing all over the place. But we had 3 more, and I'm hoping I can also get another batch in. And I think we were going 1, 2, and my friend over there was 3. And I saw another batch coming up, so I'd love for us to take those quickly, address those, get to the one other one. Maybe we make it 4, because you have been waiting for a while as well. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, and we'll then transition into music. Hey, Terry, go for it.
Okay. Terry Gibbs with the Alliance for Sustainability. My original question was this, which is, what is sacred and can't be touched? And Aldo Leopold, great economist, not economist, but ecologist, once said that economists know about the value of a dewdrop. What do economists know about the value of a dewdrop on a spider's web? So there are these sacred things. So that was my original, but 2 other things got triggered, just quick comments. One is, as an economist myself, this conversation brought up the reminder that the Latin root of the word economy means care of the home. And I think that's what we need to remind all these businesses. That's what it really comes from. And the second is, it brought up something that I really haven't heard here today. I'm just curious what you guys would say about it. And that's the need for a shared vision, engaging all the stakeholders, shareholders and stakeholders. Creating a vision brings out our shared humanity. And can we create that? So that's the other.
Thank you, Terry. We'll go here. And maybe for efficiency, we'll get these 3 and then come to the gentleman over there to have the last word.
Hi, my name's Osprey, and I run the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network. Great panel, really, really good discussion. Thank you. So my question is going to try to consolidate a bunch of different thoughts. I'm glad you brought up time, because we're also not on our own time scale to create these beautiful interactions that I really agree with all of you have stated about shared stakeholders, but nature is really in charge, and so I'd like to bring in time scale as part of the discussion. And then also, I think we have to address this ongoing extractive economy and the fact that we're built these economies on endless economic growth models. And so while we need to address protecting nature, how do we start also really dealing with planetary boundaries, that we can't just keep having these same business models? It's not working, and how do we really bring that into discussion? And the last part I'll say about that is we do a lot of work to transition the fossil fuel industry, as an example. So in this process, while we're seeing businesses, as you mentioned, Bindi, I really like this idea of how, we keep conveying to businesses that they have children, we need future. but there's some businesses that have to sunset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, good morning. I'm Carla Henson from the Philippines. I'm from Life Haven Center for Independent Living, an organization of persons with disabilities. So I represent that group. So there's over 16% of us in the world. And yet, persons with disabilities are not part of the conversation. So my question is, how can we be part when people see us as just beneficiaries and not as active contributors? We want to partner, we want to be part, we want to be involved, but we barely get the invitation.
That's powerful. And last one. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm a teacher. I request to stand. I'm called Raymond Rioka from Africa Climate and Health Alliance, based in Uganda. We advance climate health in the climate discussions, policy research, and financing. My question to the panelists is, as we advance for the partnership for the saving the planet, how do we save the lives of the people as we advance to save the planet? We know in your country, DRC, flooding. In my country, Uganda, we see bushfires. And in the US, we are watching on TV the aftermath of Neymar, the earthquake. How do we save the people's lives the first? The challenges are happening as we save the planet. Otherwise, we are looking at saving the planet, but the people there are being affected. So it's imperative to think about the people there. Thank you.
We will not be able to answer each of these very deep observations in the 3 minutes that I will allow the panel to take them on. But as you saw, wisdom is, I wouldn't even say evenly distributed in this room. I would argue there's more wisdom out here than up here. And I'm hoping that after we can continue this conversation. That said, economy, the home, the people in it, humanity and shared humanity and humanity of everyone, whatever their endowment of physical abilities and so on, and their ability to contribute to the conversation. And the question of timescales, we're on a clock. Discuss.
Very, very short.
Yes.
Actually, conservation is going to stop to be conservation if it ceases to consider people and communities. And the reason why I think the modern conservation failed, and when I talk about failure, I know there are still protected areas and so on, but they are totally based on partners, foreigners, contributions. The government are not investing in there. For me, that's a failure, because if those people say there is war in Congo, we are leaving, then the protected area are going to die. The reason why protected areas, the modern conservation failed, is because they considered humans as enemies of nature. And they didn't understand that humans were element of that nature, as gorillas are, as trees are. So they have to understand that humans have been harmonizing their life, thriving together with that nature before we came in with the modern conservation. So if we can come back to the traditional conservation, understanding that these people have knowledge, have practices, have ways they interact with this nature to sustain it, we're gonna reach a level where we can say we are on the right path or track.
Super.
Yeah, just to build on that, and I was going to say the same thing. Nature is people and people are nature. I mean, it is much more easy to cavalierly dismiss, I don't want to worry about those trees in the global south. Not my problem. But when you tie it to humanity, as well as to the economics, which I have to do, showing them you can't run your business without enough water, without nature. Here's why you can, I mean, those things matter. And we really can talk about nature without humanity. Tell me, some people will put in the bucket water as nature. Great. Tell me a lot of human beings who can't live without the lifeblood of water, or their communities, or their agriculture, or the jobs dependent upon it. It is absolutely impossible and objectionable to try and separate that. We should be talking about, thinking about, acting on nature as people, and they've got to be integrated everywhere we go and in every discussion.
Lisa?
Yeah, and I wanted to add on that question. I've been ruminating over it. How do we become more inclusive as a movement to everyone from all walks of life and all backgrounds? And I realized that each of us have that level of blindness that we don't see where others come from. We don't see what the challenges are. And we thought we have been inclusive in this process, but oftentimes it takes a reminder and it takes an awakening, and it takes all of us to be more sensitive to where others is at. And this is really kind of a little bit of a slap in the face. I must admit that I have not thought of that. I have not thought of your questions on how this community could be part of the conversation. In a similar way, I guess how conservation movement for the longest of time did not thought as local community as part of the conversation. So this is a constant act and a constant awakening and a constant attempt to move things, to change things, to not allow things to continue to be business as usual.
Yeah. I think this whole conversation and that question in particular is a testament to the power and value of a word that is getting out of fashion at the moment, or at least is under siege from people who are terrified of it: diversity. The fact that the more different backgrounds, lenses, and abilities we bring to a problem as humanity and as nature, biodiversity as well, the more we are capable of creating resilient and powerful systems. And so I will add, it did highlight my own, as a moderator, my own blind spot, to pick a word. But also, I think if it leaves us with something, it is that in Indonesia, in the DRC, on Wall Street, everywhere that we are all from, and with every one of our particular skills, tools, and endowments, we can partner to create a better planet that builds on that exact diversity to achieve what we're trying to achieve. Please join me in thanking Farwiza, Dominique, and Mindy for their contribution. And thanking you all for your part in the conversation. The conversation is not over yet. In fact, there's a treat. Please take your seats.
Thank you.
Those of you who studied the program earlier will know that we are about to be joined by Hara, who is an artist who, in the same way that we are talking about partnerships and new languages and drawing from different traditions to really kind of create something new and integrated, has done so with her music. So we will hear from Hara in just a moment. Hara's music is a fusion of contrasts. It blends folk and Indonesian traditional music, ambient soundscapes, and field recordings, history and contemporary activism. She brings together these disparate elements to reveal deeper connections, reminding us that healing of people, of communities, and of the planet happens when we weave together the past, the present, and the future. That idea of crafting a new vision of what, not just what we had, but what we can have into the future. So she has done a lot of work through her music and through her work on a range of media. So food, art, garden-to-table cooking, which we will not be providing today, and spanning generations and geographies and disciplines to form new ways of understanding and belonging. Please join me in welcoming Hara to the stage. Welcome.
Thank you, James. Is this on? Oh, yes.
Welcome. Hi.
Hi.
So the question that I was going to pose to you, not scripted at all,
Surprise.
Surprise, you know, you will not have seen this coming, is what has taught you, what has your work weaving together across disciplines, across art forms, across traditions, what has that taught you about the power of collaboration and how we can apply that lesson to how we build partnerships for the planet?
Thank you so much for the question. I'm actually really inspired by the panel just previously, and I already prepared a question. Now I'm going to change and just be real.
All right.
I think what I've learned so far from collaborative work, I work with contemporary indigenous communities, mostly young indigenous peoples. I work with community gardens in Indonesia, but also in New Zealand, Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I also work alongside farmer co-ops. And from this work, I think community work is messy. Our work is very messy because humans are messy. And one example is earlier this year, I got kicked out of my community garden, but not just me, it was 300 gardeners. And the reason why we got kicked out of this land is because the only access to the garden was this foundation. It was like a transit housing for homeless people, but they ran out of money and they just had to sell their houses. So it's an economic challenge that they were facing. And after that, there was some criminality, like all our wheelbarrows got stolen and our tomatoes were stolen. It was just a simulation of human life, of community, like of real human lives. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that climate partnerships and needs to be intersectional because climate issue is a political issue, it's a social issue, it's an economic issue. It has to be intersectional. So if we're thinking about partnerships that are effective and radical, we really need to be intersectional, and by that, including the disability communities, we really have to rethink what inclusive means, not just for the benefit of certain companies or the oligarchs, the 1%. We need to really redistribute wealth and power. And lastly, about bridging the language of the heart. As an advocate and as an artist myself, I think art does that. And we need to think partnerships in terms of climate partnerships also by engaging with the arts, with music, with collaboration with other artists, because that is the language that is beyond words. So yeah, hopefully my song will prove that.
On that note, I'm just gonna leave and thank you.
I would like to dedicate this song to our fierce, fierce women, our ancestors, our grandmothers, the mothers, the daughters who have taken such good care of the land, become stewardesses and protectors of the land, perhaps in their journey sacrifice their lives and dreams. Thank you for teaching me the power of the politics of care. This is perempuan or woman. Perempuan diampunya kekuatan alam semesta melahirkan nyawa raga bencana manusia. Lacur dunia, I just wanna feel alive. 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 Ooh, 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 ooh.
I'm not going to say anything. Thank you. And thank you all. And enjoy the rest of your week and your time here at the forum. Thank you. And thanks to the organizers.